Welcome back to The Decision 2024 from Valuetainment and VT Analytics. This week, there's new national polling that's out. There's a whole bunch of polls from Atlas Intel and others. There was a big weekend in college football for both of the candidates. And on top of it all, last night we had a very interesting debate, and we've got early polling on that. I'm Tom Ellsworth, the BizDoc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield. Let's go ahead and dive into another week of data, starting with the national polls. We can see as of September 25th, Trump is actually taking a lead by up to 4 points. We can see that Kamala Harris has remained, stable, but also pretty stagnant. She has not reached above 50 in the last several weeks. In fact, there was only one time during the 15th of September. Whereas Donald Trump, he has been on the consistent incline. We can see that over the last several days, he has maintained his position in the lead aside from 1 or 2 times, but his moving average is very stable. It's on an upward trajectory as opposed to Kamala Harris. From there, we go into the college polling, and this was some very interesting data considering the fact that Notre Dame have not shown a Republican in the lead in their presidential polling, I believe in the last 4 or 5 different cycles. What we can see here is that Donald Trump is actually in the lead by 2 points. He is ahead at 48% compared to Kamala Harris 46%. And then we see that the other/independent or undecided is tracking at around 6%. And that wasn't the only thing happening on college campuses, right, Tom?
Yes, it was a long weekend if you were Tim Walz. Tim Walz went to the University of Michigan football game where he was booed, as you can see in this clip. And as he walked back through the tunnel under the stadium exiting, he appears to give the finger to some fans he didn't agree with. Certainly not the look they were looking for. In high contrast, at the Georgia-Alabama game, as you can see here, Trump was given a hero's welcome, and they stopped, were chanting USA, USA. So it was a very different look on typically liberal college campuses in America, although you would have to say that Alabama, Georgia is something of a home team for Trump. However, the upper Midwest, Tim Walz from Minnesota, you would have thought that the Michigan game would have been a home field for him, but it was not. Now, I said it was a long weekend for Harris and Walz. Here's why. After he was booed and apparently gave the finger to some students, she suddenly was switching her position on the border. She stopped for the border for what she said was an investigative border visit, which turned out to be only a 20-minute photo op. And then eagle-eyed analysts were finding this. From 2021 to 2024, Kamala had only made 2 tweets or posts on X about the border. This year, January 1st to 9/26, 7, but suddenly over the weekend, 15, along with the metamorphosis of adopting Trump's position, such as no taxes on tips, came to the border where suddenly she was making very Trump-like statements about her position on the border. Roll it all together, something of a difficult weekend for Harris and Walz, but guess what? That's the way these campaigns run.
Now, as we've noted, she has made several tweets in the last several days, one of which is really demonizing Trump and the Republican administration for shutting down the quote-unquote bipartisan border bill. Now, what's particularly interesting about this is this was an omnibus bill, which means that there were several other bills that were wrapped up inside this one bill. She's trying to act as if Donald Trump did not want to secure the border, when in reality, the main reason why they shut down that bill was because it still enabled a certain amount of illegal immigrants to cross the border on a day-to-day basis. But not only that, there was also hundreds of millions of dollars wrapped up in aid for Ukraine that was also included in that bill. What type of Republican would want to support that?
Well, it goes both ways, to be objective about it, but that was a bill that's filled of what they call pork, that there was a lot of other things that were in the barrel, not just the title, which is usually deceptive. The Inflation Reduction Act that contained a bunch of basically charity for corporations. And now you have a bipartisan border bill that had a bunch of foreign aid and other things. And this is what we've come to see in Washington. So to say people were against a border bill is simply untrue. They were against some of the other spending that was in the border bill. But even as they're against it, a week prior, they were probably pushing bills of their own full of pork. Now getting back to the polls, Atlas Intel, known as one of the more reputable top 3 in terms of their accuracy in the last presidential election, they had a big drop this weekend in terms of the number of polls that they put out on the wires. What did we see?
We saw that Trump is actually leading and in some cases charging ahead in many of the different battleground states. Now, you'll remember we did a deep dive on North Carolina just last week. We showed you all of the most recent polls, in which case most of the time Trump was actually leading. So it's interesting to see Atlas Intel currently has Trump at 48.1 by comparison to Kamala Harris's 50.5. That is one of the states that she appears to be ahead. And then from there, we also have Nevada. She is tracking at 50.5% by comparison to Trump's 47.7. And aside from that, in all of the other battleground states, Trump is either winning or it is a dead even race.
The sign of a good pollster is one that will put out everything that they've assembled together, even if there is seemingly outlier statistics. The North Carolina statistics are a bit of an outlier. But if you look at the Atlas Intel poll, they said that's what we pulled, that's what we found this week. Other polls are showing that Trump is rolling up on a decisive tip point of over 3 points in North Carolina. There are multiple points of validation on that. And in Georgia, it's expected to be tight. And in Arizona, Trump has as many as 3.5 point lead. In Nevada, I would say this is correct. I see Harris right now, VT Analytics, at about a point and a half favorability. However, as we will get in the call, all of this matters, and it is pointing to momentum on the Electoral College side heading toward Donald Trump. But before we get to the polling data, let's get to the VPs that went at it last night.
A lot of people went into this thing thinking it was going to be bad, thinking that, Tim Walz wouldn't be able to live up to the job. Some people were skeptical about JD Vance too. What we can say is Walz definitely lived up to his reputation. He was jolly, but certainly a little bit clumsy, and not the guy you want negotiating with Putin. The clumsy part really comes in with his misspoke and the comment that he made about becoming friends with school shooters.
From end to end on the internet, it was a meme. And it was certainly, I don't know if it was a gaffe or it was just a misspoke, but in the world of instant response social media, it went everywhere. And the Harris campaign cannot be pleased by either his overall performance, his demeanor, looking over at JD Vance and kind of looking a little confused and bug-eyed, whereas JD Vance looked poised looking over at Walz.
He looked extremely poised. A lot of people would even say presidential. And JD Vance won over a lot of people who were still a little bit unsure of him on the Trump ticket.
We'll find out what the polls say in a couple of weeks. I would say if you were a Trump supporter, you still are a Trump supporter. And if you had questions about JD Vance, I think you probably feel better this morning and confident, even confident about succession later, because he did look presidential. Well, there were some opinion polls. Remember, these are just opinion polls run by media outlets, but the overnight opinion polls all came in this range. Well over 60%, 63, 65 for Vance, 35 for Walz, so it's a 1/3, 2/3. That's not close in the world of 1 point polling politics. And there's another one here, 58-39, and 2% saying it was even. These people obviously drink at home. It was anything but even if you were watching it, regardless of what side you were on. So if you look through all the social media, it was a very good night for Republican energy. They feel good about their candidate, Trump, and his choice now because they're even more confident in that choice because they got to see the side of JD Vance. However, I think on the Harris side, there's probably still work to do.
Exactly. It's going to take a little while to see the way things really play out in the polls, because we can look back and see that these presidential debates do tend to move the independents. We look back to what happened with the Reuters focus group after Trump debated Kamala, and we saw that despite many people feeling that she actually won the debate, she didn't win them over on the core issues that actually matter to Americans. The independents moved, and they moved for Trump. So it'll be really interesting to see the way this plays out for the vice presidential debate.
You can win the opinion poll, and there were many people that gave similar marks to Kamala Harris in a presidential debate, but then you don't win new voters or the voters that have yet to make up their mind. But in those focus groups, it showed that Trump did on the top 2 issues being the economy and then immigration. So we'll wait and see if there's a bounce, if any, out of this, or if there's just some enthusiasm for JD Vance to bolster the Trump ticket. And now it's time for this week's call.
It'll probably take about a week or two until we're able to really determine which candidate, if any, got a little bit of a bump or a bounce out of the vice presidential debate, which took place last night. But for now, we're going to go ahead and dive into our VT call. This is the culmination of all of the data that you just saw, plus our own aggregate to bring you our call 5 weeks from the election. Tom, what are we seeing?
Here we are. Right now, we are seeing an 80% probability of Trump winning the Electoral College. And take a look at what we're seeing here. North Carolina, we do not see any path barring a major shift in the polling at this hour for Kamala Harris. And Georgia remains tight, but the outlying areas solid red, and we're seeing an uptick in the percentages into the low 60s for the outlying counties, which are balancing very blue Atlanta and Fulton County. But we see that. Pennsylvania, we are seeing it approaching a 4-point spread in VT Analytics. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. If those go as we are currently projecting, the night would be over for Kamala Harris, and here's why. These three without Arizona is 270. That's the ball game. Even if she was to win Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada at that point, with the rest that are projected very solidly in blue and red through the West, the Electoral College math will simply be at least 270 for Donald Trump. So, and with the election little under 5 weeks from today, that's what we see.
Join us next week as we take a deep dive into Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, some of the main swing states that will really determine this election. We're going to be looking for any post-debate bounce and bringing you all of the headlines, but most importantly, all of the numbers. My name is Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc, and we'll let the candidates talk or flip off college students because the numbers will scream, and we're looking for the numbers to show you where it's headed.